everybody came into Kemet to learn. When you go back and you look at all of the ancient civilizations from that time, all melanated people across the world, everybody came into Kemet to learn, to study. The ancient Egyptians taught these people how to basically run their civilizations and taught them a lot of stuff. And when you go look at the ancient civilizations from around that time, we see every melanated civilization grew. Like they took that knowledge and they did things with it. We see that the Asians grew their civilizations. We see that in India, they grew their civilization. We see down in South America, the civilizations grew. And we look around and we see that it's the same type of teachings in ancient Kemet that we find in these ancient civilizations. We see the same type of symbols, the same type of following that we can see from ancient Egypt. And we see they had the same understanding. When we look across the world, we can find things that identically match up with what we see in ancient Kemet, showing that they must have at some point came into close contact with each other and basically prove what everybody is saying, that everybody came into Kemet to learn. The only civilization we don't find during this time where everybody is growing, everybody is developing their civilization, the only civilization we do not find, the only people we do not find during this time is the Europeans, white folks. You can go back during this time of ancient Kemet and you don't find a civilization of Europeans developed as the Chinese was, developed as they were in India. You can't show me a place on the planet where we can find ancient ruins that belong to Europeans prior to the fall of ancient Kemet. And this is what you also have to understand. Ancient Rome, ancient Greece were African civilizations. So when we talk about them teaching and them coming into Kemet, Africans as well, came into Kemet to learn from the ancient Egyptians, and they were taught, and everybody took their knowledge back. The only people we do not find growing a civilization as sophisticated as the ancient Egyptians, as sophisticated as the Indians and the Asians, is the Europeans. We do not get a sophisticated European civilization until the conquest of ancient Kemet. When Kemet fell, this is where we eventually start getting the Greek philosophers and everything like that start to come into play after they stole the knowledge from ancient Kemet. So we know the ancient Egyptians taught math, they taught science, they taught about astrology, they taught a lot of things to these people who came in to learn. Now, it was a lot of stuff that you could learn, a lot of stuff that you can have hands-on training with, as far as the ancient Egyptians teaching about, crops and how to basically agriculture, everything like that. They taught everything. The difference was, the mystery school. In order for you to get accepted into the ancient Egyptian the mystery schools, you had to pass a series of tests. There was an initiation process. And the process was even tougher for anybody that wanted to become what the Egyptians call a hem-netcher or a hem-et-netcher, which means a male or female priest. In order to get that deep into the mystery schools, there was a process, and this is where the basis of basically meditation, yoga, chakra work, all this stuff comes from the knowledge and understanding of the healing process of Sikkim. Now, it says here, Egypt was then the cultural center of the world where everyone sought wisdom and learning, and scholars came far and wide to study in the temples. However, few made it through the arduous process of initiation into the priesthood. Some did succeed and took their teachings back to their homelands, where they taught others the sacred art of healing, of mysticism. Over the years, the teachings changed as the teachers developed and grew with their philosophy until each system had its own distinctive feel and energy. Now understand, this process, this test you had to take, was a process of understanding how to feel energy. And there was tests that you had to take to prove that you can feel and understand different types of energy. This was a major part in the healing process and understanding how the ancient Egyptians were able to do a lot of stuff that they did. Now, one of the reasons why, of course, that the Europeans couldn't pass this process is because the calcified pineal gland. We also understand that having a lack of melanin played a role in you not being able to understand and pass this part of the initiation process and feeling energy and everything like that. So we know that, you had Thales, you had Plato, Aristotle, Socrates, Pythagoras. We had a few ancient Greeks that were allowed to study in the ancient Egyptian mystery schools. And a lot of people say, well, they were Greeks. That's another thing you got to understand. A lot of these first, because there is not a long list, and it's something you really got to think about. Remember, we are living in a society that is controlled by the conquerors, not the conquered. So they are telling a false history, and it's up to us to be researchers and go out and to put forward what makes the most sense. And this is clearly one of the things that they hide. The thing is, there are so many reports and depictions that the first Greeks that were initiated into the mystery schools were black or indeed mixed race, mixed black and mixed Greek or mixed with something else, which is one of the reasons why they were able to pass the initiation process of the Sikkim and prove they were able to feel energy because they were melanated. And this is one of the things that is talked about in the book Black Athena, understanding that the original Greeks were black, of course, before conquest. And it's something I'm going to talk about in the Sacred Science Volume 1 that's coming up. This is a long series that's going to be good. But we're going to get into a lot of this stuff. But we're black. A lot of people know this already. When you look at the depictions we see of Socrates, a lot of people argue a lot of his features were black. And we know, as I said, about Black Athena. And it's so much other things to point to this being so. The reason being, one, is there's only a small amount of Greeks that we could point to that actually made it into this part, the priesthood or the mystery schools of the ancient Egyptians. You would think it would be more. You would think it would have been a lot more information. And then also, you would think if they really got in there and got the knowledge that they need, it would be no need to conquer Kemet. So it's going to make a lot of sense in a second. But yeah, it says here, the origins of ancient Greek civilization. Let's comment on the book by Barton Bernal. It says, Bernal rejects the theory that Greek civilization was founded by Indo-European settlers from Central Europe, which we know is bullshit. That theory, which Bernal calls the Aryan model, which it is, became generally accepted during the 19th century. Bernal defends instead what he calls the ancient model. The name refers to the fact that both Egyptians and Phoenician influences on the Greek world were widely accepted in antiquity. And this is easy for people to understand. One, you had the Aryans come down from the north after the Ice Age or what have you, started to come into what we know as Greece. And you had the Phoenicians there. Eventually, as the Greeks admit themselves, that they were the ones who basically, they got the alphabet from the Phoenicians, which the Phoenicians got the alphabet from the Egyptians because the Phoenicians were Egyptians. A lot of people get confused with the names. These are lazy black people, the Egyptians, Africans, whatever you want to call them. They, of course, was in that area. There's no reason for anybody to think otherwise, because we got to understand, one, if you're talking about Heraklion, which was that port, and we're talking about ancient Egyptians, Northern Africans being in that part of Africa for who knows how long. Of course, they would have, went north. Of course, they would be able to cross the Straits of Gibraltar to get over there from Spain and be in Europe, which they was. And if you ever flew from Egypt to Greece, it's not that far of a flight. It's really quick. You can fly right over there. Sailing, you can see how quick it would be to sail right across that area. It wouldn't take that long at all. On a boat, I flew back and forth between the two a few times. It wouldn't take them that long at all. But of course, they was in the area. And when you understand, the wars that happened, and when they came down and started to basically mix in and blend in with the ancient Greeks, how you got these mixed, Africans and Greeks, white people, Aryans, and that's how they were basically infiltrated themselves into ancient Greek society. So understand, the Europeans that were too far from melanin could not be, initiated into the mystery schools. They couldn't get in. They couldn't pass the initiation. They couldn't pass the process. So eventually we know the Aryans, what they would have been called at this point, would go and mix in with every melanated civilization across the planet. And it's something you got to think of, connect the dots. You're in Kemet. You cannot get this information. You can't get into the deeper parts of the mystery school. So you remember that, well, wait a minute, these other races of people, these other groups of Africans, these other people who came into Kemet to learn, well, they got initiated. They got in. Let's go to these people and see if we can get in, which they couldn't get in as well. The mystery schools, even still, they taught what they taught, but it's not 100% clear exactly what the ancient Egyptians taught them or how much they taught them. But we can see from the structures and, what they have in these civilizations, like, in China and down in South America, it's amazing information that they must have learned from the ancient Egyptians. So they went to basically try to learn from them. They couldn't get in. They mixed in with everybody. They mixed in with, Chinese. Came into India and basically took over and mixed in with them for a while. And we understand the whole concept. I talked about this in a Buddhism series about what happened once the Aryans came in and how they basically claimed they created Hinduism, Buddhism, or what have you. And a lot of this was going on. So we have to look at this. And again, you have to understand, go look around the world. We see during this time, we see melanated civilizations showing us the same type of knowledge and information that we see in ancient Kemet. And we see that there is a comparison of the knowledge all around the world as it is in ancient Kemet. And we know that these people came in to study and were taught by the ancient Egyptians, which everybody talks about. But then you see nothing from white folks until the fall of Kemet. Something to think about and piece this together. You also have to understand them not being where they need to be at physically. They couldn't really understand spirituality. They couldn't really understand what the ancient Egyptians was talking about or why certain things was even important. Imagine trying to get into this mystery school and you can't grasp the fact that you can't get in because of something that you should be able to do that these other people are able to do. They couldn't understand it. They couldn't wrap their head around it. And I'm going to show you guys in the Sacred Science series about, one of the reasons why this was possible, and also how Greek mythology, and this is another big thing. We talk about Homer and a lot of the ancient Greek writers back then. You got to think about who these people really was. So I'm going to show you guys how, when we're talking about Greek mythology, when we're talking about all these characters, Zeus and Pythagoras, Zeus and Prometheus, and all these other people, that the pantheon of Greek mythology, these people, these beings were created by the Black Greeks, which makes a lot more sense to me when you understand what we're going to get into. They created these Greek gods. And it's going to be hard for people to accept this. But again, one of the questions you got to ask yourself, if you created, the pantheon of Greek mythology, I'm talking about the Greek gods, powerful as they is, all the stories, the mythologies and everything, if you created them, why would you then later, if you're trying to, bring people into the understanding of the whole Hellenization process, the whole Greek process. Now, as I talked about before, we know the ancient Egyptians understood a lot of it, but it makes more sense to understand that if these people that they were trying to force this stuff on understood it, but the reason why they understood it is because they created it. That makes a lot more sense, and that's exactly what it was. So think about it. If you're trying to push Greek culture, the Greek gods, onto civilizations of people, why would you not then use the pantheon of Greek gods if you created them? Why would you create Serapis? Why would you then go and dress like Egyptians instead of dressing like Greeks if you are the Greeks that created these powerful Greek gods? Think about that. If you have Hermes and Zeus and all these powerful Greek gods that's supposed to be white in your image that you created, why would you not push them as being the face, the forefront of your Greek religion? Think about that. Now, when we come in out of Greece, remember later the Greeks, if you look in Greece, what are they talking about? What are they worshiping? They're not worshiping Zeus. these Greeks is religious. They're Christians and Jews and Muslims. They're not into Greek mythology. They're not following the pantheon of the Greek gods that they supposedly created. Makes more sense when you begin to understand. But we're going to get into that in sacred science. But you got to look at that and understand, creating Serapis and why it would make more sense for them to go ahead and double cross and stab the Egyptians in the back who did so much for them. It will make more sense. I mean, everything starts to come together when you think about the Egyptians helping to build the temple of Delphi and the temple of Zeus. It makes more sense them taking the time to do this if they were the ones that created it in the first place, black people. And why then, when it was destroyed, the Greeks never rebuilt it, still in ruins. They never tried to fix it, still in ruins. During the entire Hellenization process, they do not push these Greek gods. They don't push them across to everybody to try to force it onto the people. It's Serapis. It's something entirely different from what you would expect if you came up with the pantheon of Greek gods and Greek mythology. So now it's funny when you go back and start to understand the Greeks after the fall of Kemet, once they conquered and how they ruled and how they set up their civilization, and that their whole thing, their whole philosophy about, Greece and how they was going to run everything was based on rationality. What makes sense? What's the best thing to do? What makes sense? And anybody that's basing stuff off of, rationality, what makes sense, shows you one that they don't have a sense of spirituality. Now, when you take something that should be dealt with on a spiritual level and you don't deal with it spiritually at all, instead you attack it on a rational level, you change the energy of that spirituality. You change the energy of spirituality into something else. And for the Greeks, what they did, they basically changed the energy of spirituality into the energy of materialism, because to them, stuff didn't make sense to do so for spiritual purposes, when to them, survival and everything that really was important had to do with material. Eat, build, stay warm, so on and so forth. So it's like, what is the point of doing this to cultivate what? If I can't grasp something spiritually, I got to worry about the physical, what I can experience, what's going on right now. So they basically based everything on the rational level of materialism. And in doing so, they created this energy of materialism. And we see that's exactly how everything basically began to spiral with them and begin to take shape as far as them building and going forward the way they went, them fighting over the lands the way they went. I mean, just think about it. It was like you had an organized process for a long time, and once they finally took over, they couldn't control themselves. The Wars of the Diadochi shows you there wasn't a spiritual process in sight. They killed each other. They didn't really care about anything. You had them come together. They couldn't rationally, separate the land. They was thinking about materialism. This is mine. I want this. This is better. And they fought and killed each other over our lands. So within their own frequency and atmosphere, they created this energy of materialism and began to basically conquer North Africa and the lands that was, formerly the ancient Egyptian empire. But now I'm going to read from Dark Light Consciousness about this particular point. And this is saying here, over the centuries, as our ancestral tribes migrated and crisscrossed the earth, interacting with local climate and ecology, the pineal gland has undergone varying forms of influence. In the northern climates of Europe, the pineal gland experienced some degree of calcification. There is less calcification among people of Asia, and the least amount of pineal gland calcification among people of more direct African background. This may have implications for mankind's experience of spirituality. I've been talking about this for a long time. Some researchers speculate that there is an association with pineal gland calcification and humankind's gradual descent into the world of both materialism and materialist philosophy. This is suggested because the pineal gland is universally associated from Descartes to Kemet with the capacity to subtly see the literal and spiritual light within us. As we move more into the material realm and lose more of our capacity For sensitivity to these realms, there is increasing pineal gland calcification. So the more material you are, the more your pineal gland calcifies because you're not spiritual. We are now at the point in our collective history where we are so deeply embedded in materialism that large numbers of us even doubt the existence of a spiritual reality itself, let alone the connection between the pineal gland and the capacity to see within. The present materialist world order is an abject rejection of every traditional and spiritual institution from the peoples of Africa, India, Europe, the Middle East, and Mesoamerica. Our age is currently the most materialistic of any in the memory of the world, which I agree. We calculate the timeless orbit of the stars, yet fail to see the internal cycle within our own souls. And this is exactly what I have come to suspect, and you have as well. It's a lack of empathy, something that we all talk about. How can you do the things that we have seen these people do across the planet for centuries? Enslave people, starve children to death. You know, the things we've seen with 9/11, blowing up children in foreign countries and bringing buildings down on these people. It's a lack of empathy. It's clearly there. And there is a true love of materialism that we see with the Europeans. I mean, just look at everything that we've been seeing. I mean, look at the system they created. It's designed and created, to be basically, servant to money. Material, gold. If you got this material thing, you can be at a certain level. Everything that we are following has to do with materialistic stuff. It's very little spirituality, and they created a whole spiritual situation with religion that's really, it's really designed to basically make you want more material. I mean, it's giving you problems. It's causing conflict within yourself. But we look at how materialistic this stuff is. If you ever watch, I always talk about Mekum, the car auction, how these people can watch people starve to death in the street, kids starving to death, but go and bid, $1 million on the car that they're not really going to drive. We see this all the time. It's materialism. Everything is based off of it. How these people can basically, if you ever watch the show American Pickers, I talked about, these people be having, very expensive, rare cars and bikes and a lot of items that they don't want to part with, at all. They don't want to let it go. Dude come in there and be offering them all kinds of crazy money. I don't want to sell. It is more love in the material than it is, for the person. We see that how they are with animals because it's something that they can control. They love dogs more than they love humans. They love animals more than they love humans. They'll let a human, they'll march up and down the street for animal rights, right next to a bunch of homeless people that starving to death on the street. So how was you putting so much time and effort and organization into, animals than human people that you can help and put back on their feet quickly? But they don't do it. There's more love for the animal because it's something that they can control and possess. Plain and simple. We see that with materialism and everything. Everything that they do. It's a materialistic, world that they live in, and everything is based off of that. And it just seems to be more important than true spirituality. And we see that it's so. To put the value, so much value in materialistic things, and to base a society off of material rather than spirituality is something, that you gotta not have any feeling for in order to do so. That's why I talked about before how we see black people in church getting the Holy Spirit, the so-called Holy Ghost, and, getting real spiritual. The same stuff we see in Voodoo. We never seen Europeans do this. Never seen white folks do this. We never see them get that emotional, that feeling when it has to do with spirituality as it pertains to, energy, religion, anything. That spirituality is not there. And we see how it's falsified with people like, Benny Hinn and all these people, these television evangelists that go around fraud and faking it for the money. because that's basically what it's about. Everything that they do, the reason why they are in the position they are in and structured the way they are, because they put more energy into the material than spirituality. We are way more rational and more understanding because we're like, it's not that serious. I'm not going to pay all this money for no car. I'm not going to pay all this money for that. And it's what they're changing within us, as you can see with hip hop culture. But it's deep when you really start to think about it. It makes a lot of sense when he's talking about the calcification of the pineal gland and how it directly has to do with the lack of empathy and you wanting more material and being more caught up in a materialistic realm. Now, again, I know it's a lot of people who don't like to talk about melanin and they don't get caught up in that whole conversation. A lot of people think we just make too much of it. They don't understand the importance of it. So, as I showed before with Dr. Carl Marat talking about chagas, I want you to watch this clip and understand how important it is.
In fact, there's somebody even studying that and wondering whether energy is directly absorbed from the melanin in your skin and transformed into energy in your body. Okay? And they even think about could in the future, and they're developing this now, they're taking melanin and making batteries out of them that store energy from the sunlight directly. It might in fact become a future source of how we're going to generate energy. Now, let's get back with that little bit of physics background. Let's talk about melanin inside chaga and melanin inside the body. So it absorbs thousands of times more electromagnetic radiation actually than chlorophyll does. And chlorophyll is what we need to make proteins and sugars, especially sugars in the body. It exists in many other tissues, as I mentioned. It's actually a very important molecule in any woman who's having a baby because the fetus has all this melanin in it, as I'll show you. Okay? And it's thought to be, by some people, a master molecule that actually steers how the body communicates. For example, Frank Barr, a scientist, wrote a whole article, a whole issue of a journal called Medical Hypothesis saying, melanin is such a special molecule and it's found in the babies. It may have a major role in steering things in the body, in the whole regulatory system. Melanin's role in embryological organization, that's in the baby's organization, and tissue repair and tissue regeneration may be connected to the major role that it plays to balance the body, that's called homeostasis, in the autonomic, neuroendocrine, and immunological system. So in other words, melanin may play a much bigger role than just absorbing all this radiation, and when you get it into your body, it actually has a major effect on your immune system. Here's a picture of a baby at 35 days of pregnancy, and this is the eye of an embryo inside a mother. It's a very tiny little thing. Notice that the eye is pure melanin. That's an amazing picture, isn't it? To see all this melanin is inside, and when the embryo first forms, there is what's called the dark streak. It's all melanin. Okay, here's an example of a plant. It's an eggplant that has melanin in it and a genetically changed one that is no melanin in it. Notice the size of the two difference. I mean, this is an indirect indication that melanin, directly can transduce energy in the vegetable kingdom. Now, the body is a living matrix, and you really want to get this because this is kind of part of the operating system of your body. And I know that as we're talking about it, you really have to strain a little bit to stay with me, but I think it'll make some sense here. The body is actually a communication system where everything is connected to everything else, and it works through light. It works through light. It's called biophotons. And in this communication system, cells have connections to other cells called integrins, and electrons and light flows between cells. So it's like a supercomputer. Your body is like a supercomputer, and the skin is connected to every other part of the body.
So now, as I pointed out before, one of the things he is clearly not saying in that video is that Africans already possess an abundance of melanin. So all the stuff I'm telling you that you're going to have problems with if you don't have this chagas or have this melanin, the blacks The Africans will not have this problem. They produce it naturally. It's all over them. Their organs are secreting in it. They have pure melanin all over, so they won't have these problems. So that's something you got to think about. It's a major imbalance. It's a big problem going on that they will not tell Europeans. They will not tell white folks about this stuff to really make sense of their issues. And it's one of the things I talked about before. You got to understand, before we was all on TV, and before we was even really allowed to be free and do all the stuff we was doing, crime was everywhere. It was all over the place. I talked about Dragnet and 1 Adam 12 and how it was showing only white folks on or committing all these crimes. Plain and simple. This is what was going on. This is what is a destructive society. And I believe that they were worried and scared that the people would eventually take over. Because at every point, just go back and look. Every time this government has put a law in place against these white folks, they said, fuck that shit. We go back to Prohibition. You had a whole crime organization across the country going against this government because of Prohibition, because they wanted their booze. They wanted that material possession. So Prohibition happened, and they basically had to end up saying, okay, we got to side with the people and make it legal because this crime is getting out of hand. It's the same thing with the mob. Look at what the mob did. They went against the government. They had organized crime because they say, you know what, this whole thing is a scam. It's about materialism. This stuff, these people is getting stuff. We supposed to sit around and work and be under they fucking thumb while they making all this money. We got to sit back and really work for this system. They understood it. So the mob did what they did. They went out and took until eventually they got with the program and they got organized and they had enough material possession and enough money to possess what they wanted. They put themselves in a position of power. It's exactly the MO of what these people do. So when they seen that this was going to keep happening, they had to flip the switch. And it's going to make a lot of sense as we go on. It's one of the reasons why they knew they had to allow us to mix. Because they had to get melanin in these people to try to control and change that mindset. It was a destructive mindset, and it's not too much stuff they could have got over on the people with. After a while, the people would have took over. You can go back in history and look at how many kings got their head cut off or got killed by the people because they wasn't treating the people right.